Hello, everyone. I'm Jordan Carter, curator here at Dia. Welcome, and I'm thrilled to really welcome you all to today's event, which is celebrating the launch of part 2 of the Artist's Web project, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth, which is now live on our website. Today, we'll be hearing from the artists, Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahme, as well as special guests, Jill Cassett and Omar Barada. So following the conversation, we'll have a brief Q&A period, and then a performance and DJ set, which will be live streamed straight from Palestine by Julmud, which is not to be missed. And with that, I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Kathleen Anderson, Max Tanone, and Theodora Bocanegra-Lang for their essential work in making today's event possible. And now I'd like to introduce Kelly Cleveland, Chief Curator at the Wexner Center of the Arts and former curator at Dia, who organized this project. And she'll tell you a little bit more about the project, as well as introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Yes, hi, I'm Kelly Cleveland, former curator at Dia, and I've had the pleasure of working on this project for, my gosh, 4 years, 4+ years. But the project itself is longstanding. It's been in development for over a decade, and I know that today's conversation will probably trace a lot of that development and inspiration. It has various iterations, and as mentioned, there was a part 1 that was launched last December. It was called Postscript, and that is when you go to the website and you view the project, you can experience that. And then today we're celebrating the launch of part 2, which is exploring the fuller collection of videos that have been collected by Basel and Ruanne over the last decade plus, alongside recordings that they have been working on in Palestine with various performers who I'll introduce and speak a little bit more about. This is a co-commission. The project May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth is a co-commission with MoMA, and a exhibition will be opening at the end of this, actually end of April, that's a companion to the digital project, and that's being curated by Martha Joseph. First, I want to just extend a thank you to my colleagues. Am I a little bit too loud? I feel like I am. Okay. I feel like I just can hear myself right now. To my colleagues, Jordan Carter, Theodora Lang, and Max Tanone, who have put together all of the technical details, logistical details of today, and I really appreciate it. This work, as mentioned, is part of Dia's Artist Web Project series, which has been a long-standing series at Dia. And this marks the 40th project. It began in 1995, and amazing. So please, I think it deserves it. It's an incredible series, something I had the pleasure of working on when I was at Dia. And if you haven't yet explored the other projects, I definitely encourage it. Who else to thank? So a little bit more about the project. As I mentioned, part 1, the Postscript, launched last December in 2020. And so today is this larger, more expansive project, which I think the speakers and the artists will be walking us through. So I don't want to say too much because I think it's really sort of better experienced. But over the last several years, the artists have also collaborated with electronic musicians. Haykal, is that correct? Haykal? Okay. It's close enough. Julmud, who will be joining us as we shared earlier after the talk, and Makimakkuk. Okay, there we go. As well as dancer Rima Baransi. Great. All of whom are based in Palestine, as I mentioned. You're going to see a lot of that footage and these performances as we walk through the project itself. So alongside the found recordings of the collection, which have been culled from various sources over the last decade, will be also this new footage that features these performers and musicians, as well as texts. So the texts have been transcribed from the videos, from the archive videos, and then also translated into English. So they're transcribed into Arabic and then translated into English. All of these layers are sort of components and elements of the project itself. So I'm just going to introduce everyone. Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahme They've been working together for, 15 years, say. Who's counting? Who's counting? For a long time. Basel was born. Is that right? Okay, so they've been together for 15 years, and I think that counts for working together. Basel Abbas was born in Cyprus in 1983. Ruanne was born in Boston in 1983 as well. They've exhibited internationally, most recently at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Central Museum in the Netherlands, and the Gallery Proyectos Ultravioleta in Guatemala City. Their work was also included in the 2015 Sharjah Biennial, and they were awarded the Sharjah Biennial Prize. They both live here as well as in Ramallah, so between, of course, when there isn't a pandemic keeping them apart. Omar Barada, writer and curator. I feel bad, I'm standing right in front of you, Omar. Here. There he is. Focuses on the politics of translation and intergenerational transmission. Recently, he published the poetry collection Clonal Hum. Is that correct? Okay, 2020. And co-edited Le Septième Port in 2021, which is a Ahmed Bounani's, correct, okay, Ahmed Bounani's posthumous history of Moroccan cinema. Barada lives in New York and teaches at Cooper Union, where he organizes the interdisciplinary seminar public lecture series, which is incredible. I think all of us can agree on that. Jill Cassett is a theorist, historian, and artist. They are professor of visual studies in the departments of art history and gender and women's studies at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is my alma mater. Cassett is currently completing Nectaro Landscaping, the first part of a 2-book project, and their work has also been displayed nationally and internationally, including recent exhibitions at the Riston Art Center in Appleton, Wisconsin, the Chazen Museum of Art in Madison, and Signs and Symbols, New York. So please join me in welcoming the artists and speakers, and please do stay for Julmud's performance. Thank you so much.
We had talked about my really wanting to kind of dive in immediately, since we have on the screen this really tantalizing set of juxtapositions from part 2. And I first came to your work, Basel and Ruanne, through And Yet My Mask is Powerful, that takes its title from of all the surprising places, as someone who's had a really complicated relationship to lesbian feminism, to recognize Adrienne Rich as the title for this profoundly, and not just lesbian feminist, but Jewish Adrienne Rich, for this work that insists on solidarity and love with Palestine, was such a gorgeous moment. And I was hooked immediately just by the title. And I wanted to also, as long as we're calling presences into the room, to thank and acknowledge Amy Powell, who curated your work in Illinois, and also then deepened the connection in doing this wonderful listening session with you as the university was grappling with the problem, but also not just problem, but possibility of what would it mean to acknowledge that so much of our work is done on stolen land in a settler colony. And I also wanted to call out to River Bullock, who's here, whose work on trying to listen to what can't be heard as a technology for forming different kinds of relation. And I think what's on the screen gets us in there in a really deep way, kind of right away, in that your work is talked about so much in terms of the archive and collection, and yet in opening the archive to what seem like impossible futures, it does seem as though there's something about maybe a little bit of a shift in this new work with May Amnesia, Never Kiss Me on the Mouth, in which there's a kind of antiphony or antiphonics that really comes in deep. So, antiphony, if we know it at all, right, it's the refrain, the lament that goes back and forth. But what kind of lament can happen when we're radically disconnected, or maybe those with whom one might most need to commune aren't here? What's the antiphony for worldlessness? What's the antiphony for the kind of witnessing that might need to be done, not just by humans, but by land, sea, that's also, as you talk about it, in this living fabric that's been rent, what can, not just the sonic, which you use so profoundly, but a kind of reverb that might even go through us. And so I wondered if you could talk about this antiphony that also you articulate very much from the text fragment that's on the screen.
Is this for, yeah, okay. There's a lot, I guess, should I go? Should I start? Sorry. There's a lot to unpack there, I think. So I'm not going to be able to answer to it all, I think, because that's somehow you touched on the core of the project in a way. But, maybe I should just start with how this project began. It began with us collecting online videos during the revolutions initially, and those were mostly protests. And part of the reason that we were collecting that material is it was the only way that we could connect to the revolutions happening in Egypt and Tunis, because we were in a place that is forcefully and physically isolated from the rest of the world. So this people's archive that was emerging on social media platforms was really the way that we were able to somehow take part in the rupture that was happening, which was also a rupture of the image of the state and the power of the state. So images and sounds are really, really important, and as were songs. And I think that's, I can't go too deeply into that because that was 10 or more years ago now. And yeah, and the project moved a lot, but that was the starting point. And over time we began to be drawn more to just moments of song and movement and dance. And it became evident to us that these moments were really not only a way in which people were witnessing, but a way in which people were claiming themselves again, claiming their communities, claiming space. So we were collecting material from Syria and Iraq and Palestine. And you're talking about living fabrics that are being destroyed, and these are moments that are emerging in that moment of destruction, but they're also full of a kind of living resilience as well. And so what became, initially we didn't know why we were collecting the material. We just were very drawn to it, and I think it became more and more evident. And when we decided to work with performers to be in conversation with this archive, it was very much this idea of really thinking about how this material is moving and traveling, how we're unable to reach the people that we are listening to when they're unable to reach us, and what does it mean to think of a collective voice even in the absence of the collective or in the wreck. So that was something we were thinking about, and actually Omar came for a studio visit and he told us, you must read Stefania Pandolfo's article, Testimony and Counterpoint, and it was just everything that we had been thinking about. And so that idea of the multitude and the witnessing in the absence, even so, this kind of spectral quality of people who are no longer with us, people we can't reach. So this sense that, what we tried to get to there is the sense of it being your voice and not your voice. It is your voice, and it's the voice of others, and it's also the voice of non-human sort of forms. There's just a lot I could say about this, so I don't want to go on and on. But do you want us to play something from this, or should we just talk about it more and then play? Or
yeah, I think so. Yeah, that would be. I think it's important to also maybe.
So obviously the way this navigates, this is today's part, like today's launch of this part, and the way this navigates is you have to like trigger it yourself. The first part, it just kind of plays, you can press play. So there's many different ways you can view this.
كله رولينج Julmud, take one.
عاداني الوقت والله الوقت عاداني أنا عاداني الوقت يا هواي والله عاداني أنا عاداني الوقت يا هواي والله حال
سافرت رحت البعيد كل بالي انسانا
we're going through it very quickly. It should be a bit.
Is that you browse on.
قالت لي يا فرج وين العزيزين وقلت لها من زمن يا بنت ماتوا قالت لي يا فرج وين العزيزين قلت
And then it goes on and on, basically.
Can I ask a question about this? Since you showed we saw how it works more or less. I mean, I'm really interested in knowing, just in terms of process, the specificity, what it meant for you to work on this for an online platform. Because I mean, anybody who knows your work and who sees any of these screens will know this is your work. There are some formal aspects, the way screens overlap, the way that are yours, formally speaking. And so this is similar to your installation work in that way, but it's also very different in the sense that your installations are usually immersive. You go to an installation and you're in this environment that you're navigating, but it's all there, pre-programmed. In this case, you're relinquishing some of that control to us. So I can go and I can control the volume of the video I'm playing. I can take one away from the screen. I can't move them around. They're in their places and their sizes are fixed. But I can decide which one to play, which one not to play, etc. And the ones that are found footage, the videos that you collected, there's also a little information button. You can know the source of it. And sometimes there are transcriptions of the words, translations of the words. I mean, it's a lot of material. It's a lot of information, and it's a lot of interplay, and a lot of possible combinations between types of document. You know, like silent videos, found footage, performances that you've commissioned essentially and directed with performers in Palestine that kind of sometimes and very obviously respond to the found ones, and sometimes the link is a little less evident or less easy to find. So perhaps you could just say a little more about the compositional principles. You know, how did you make this, and what did it mean for you to not be in control of how it's going to be seen exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so there's a lot to actually think about here, because there's several elements that are playing that are at play here. I think that, you know, when we started working with the performers, there was already like the beginning of us kind of relinquishing our control over the situation. So that sort of was a very highly like improvised situation. We spent like 4 days with each performer, just us and them, looking at footage and talking about it and thinking about what this footage means before we even started to work on a performance, like started to actually rehearse and practice. And then we brought them together and they repeated each other's gestures, and it was like across 3 years that we were going back and forth and to Palestine and working with them. So there's already a sort of level of, this might sound like banal, but basically even, you know, going back after 2 years with the same performer, and they like had like some physical issues, so they couldn't do the same moves, but we incorporated their physical condition with the move, and so it became, you know, it's kind of this, you're already like allowing, I think our practice has always been like this, but in a sense that we allow the research to take us into unexpected places. But this is the kind of, I think, the most that it's been sort of shown, and then that it shows the most, essentially. And I think in terms of us unraveling the sort of process of making work, I feel that this is a process that we've been actually doing for a while in terms of us working in the studio, which again comes from this live improvised component that when we first started working together, it was actually like a live sound and video setting, performance. And then we've been trying to kind of keep this like live element in all our works. And then at some point, the research and the sort of making of the work and the threads of the work started to become part of the work. But we were always trying to maintain this sort of live and improvised. So we research in that way too. We like our desktop is like a space where we sort of put image, text, and sound, and like grab something in the moment, like a screenshot, and I think that's been, just pushed to its. I think also like we've been thinking about the web as a space for a very long time, like the virtual space, but this is the first time we managed to sort of realize the ideas that we had. Editing this was probably, for me, like the most difficult thing I've ever edited, because like it's really strange to be able to edit on like the timing and the sound. And we're not programmer. We're very lucky that we worked with Lucas. I forgot his last name. Lucas Harding was like the greatest programmer, and he basically is a very conceptual programmer. So we actually have conversations about the projects and the work, and then so that's kind of how it came about. But it was very difficult to relinquish this, because also you're like, oh, maybe we don't let them you get into that kind of conversation, mute the sound. It's like, no, you can't have these 4 sounds. But what if someone just came and started pressing? Like, if you just came and you would get a total different result, I'm sure, so all of that is, it was a process for sure. But I think that the installation, which we're still working on, the video and sound piece, is also going to be in that way. Like, even though it's going to be a sound and video, the performances have their own rhythm and their own time, and they really dictate how much we can cut. And we're like big cutters. We love cutting. Like, that's like time, and cutting is like very important. So that's been very hard, I think. But not just the web, but the performances themselves. Just, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I mean, no, that it's, I think that it's, it is sort of sometimes unusual in a way, but I also think that it's, it's very liberating to open that space, and to allow like other forms of inscription, essentially, that is way beyond our control, is actually very liberating to not constantly have that level of control.
Yeah, and actually, also one thing we did was we left a lot of the footage raw. Actually, so it's not edited at all in terms of you hear us speaking to the performers and other people, and like
we hear you say that you're really annoyed by the donkey. So
oh yeah, That's so there's stuff that like I don't even know that's in there. Like, we just kind of put footage in terms of we keep it to a time that it's still watchable, so it's not like insanely long either. But.
Well, that seemed like a really kind of gorgeous segue into, I'm hoping we could move to one of the screens where we can actually get a close-up of, you spend a lot of time very, very close to human bodies, but also a lot of time very close to plants. And I mean, it's a recurrent, you could say motif, but yeah, any of those is perfect. Maybe this one is great. And the way I was first introduced to your work was through And Yet My Mask is Powerful, where collected botanical, what a colonial discourse would call specimens, are removed from that specimen case context and are made not only available, it would seem, to touch and maybe crushing, but enact a little bit within the space of the installation some of the dangerous freedom that you give to viewers to try to make different kinds of sense out of this insistence on not just making the archive living, but to insist that we think it in relationship to the activity of going to specific sites where Palestinian homes were destroyed, and being with the traces, resurgent traces of cacti, for example, that outline where then a home was. And yet, I think there's something really interesting in these plants resurfacing here as a kind of echo of what you talk about as this whole living fabric, is the phrase that you often use for destruction, and ask us to think about the ways that the presumptively dead may return in some way, the way that ground that you think was completely raised is all of a sudden shown to be porous and perforated by plants that emerge through this ground. And there is a kind of collected assembly or chorus of non-human or more than human or other than human agencies imagined to be dead that seems really, really important. You even talk about, in some instances, the sense that a land or a plant might be singing, and I love the image and also feeling you give us from that term for dead cells within a plant organism, xylem, that create a pipe through which nutrient flows. And I couldn't help but have this kind of buzz of some sort of connective tissue between this plant, almost windpipe, because you talk about the sense that not only might cacti dance, but plants might sing, and you give us this environmental hum around so many of the performers that gives you that sense even of the land starting to buzz. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the giving into being even possessed by these other than human agencies.
Well, I mean, I think that, the land has been a big part of our work in different ways, but I think with And Yet My Mask is Powerful, that's when we were really thinking about how the vegetation can constitute a living archive that is also resisting colonial capture and erasure. And that happened very organically for us in the sense that we went to the sites of destroyed villages, Palestinian villages, and we went during spring. We went at a time that the sites were just full of all these non-human life forms. That was incredibly powerful. You felt that you were almost possessed. There is this sense of almost going into a trance. And that got us really thinking about how a lot of the original vegetation that's there is still there, and it's in that way that we actually find the villages. And it is the cactus, but it's so many other things, including these thistles that we became obsessed with, wild fennel, pomegranate, and every single site seemed to have different vegetation that would lead you to the remains. But what was so powerful about that was that the site was living. It wasn't just a dead site or a dead space. And so that is still something we very much think about. And with this project, it was also really thinking about what are the sonic sort of inscriptions in the land itself. What are the reverberations or echoes that are calling to us, and we hear sometimes, and other times we don't hear. And a lot of the performances we actually did outside. We did in places that are very much, in danger of being taken over by settlers. So it was really very much about claiming space and claiming space through doing these performances there. We were filming last May during the uprisings, and there were moments that were definitely difficult and potentially dangerous for us, but it was really important. Very often the sort of ecosystem of any space or site would very much become part of the work. So a lot of the filming that we did in the Dead Sea, there was really strong winds would suddenly emerge and become part of, and the performer would have to then deal with this huge amount of wind all of a sudden. There was also a point that two of our performers were singing the same refrain that's from a quite old Palestinian pop folk song. and a bird, the same bird, came at the same time and began singing and left after that refrain. So there were lots of moments that, the land, it's itself, and not just by land, we mean sort of everything around that ecosystem, were with us. And so, yeah, I think it is a very big part of this work. We just show some of this will help. Is the sound?
I was gonna play it one.
Oh, okay. I stopped so that we can hear.
No, you can keep
No,
going.
that's it. I can keep going and going.
This was his fault, by the way. He told me to do this.
No,
It's all
it's
my
true.
fault. I'm sorry. But I mean, it's a video and sound work, and we're having you here sitting in front of screens that are not moving. That doesn't make sense. Maybe I don't know if it's a follow-up, but maybe I can ask something here. In relation, I mean, a lot of the material that you collected is, well, obviously from Palestine, but also other places. In particular, there's a lot of Iraqi material, at least in what I came across. There's also Syria and Yemen. And I wanted to ask you a question also about something else, something that's outside of the Arab context. Because I've noticed a number of references to blackness or black thought in the work. And because we're in the US and you've made this work, or you finalized this work also in the time of George Floyd. And I'm asking for several reasons. So I've written down 2 or 3 elements. One is like one of the texts that is present in the piece is The Cry of Black Worldlessness by Panache Chigumati, and this condition of blackness as worldlessness, which echoes a number of things that you've thought about and written about and spoken about previously about Palestine. And I'm interested in those kinds of echoes also. The notion of fugitivity is also very important to you, which can be seen as another echo. And also just thinking of the importance in your work in general, and in this piece in particular, of music and movement. One thing came back to my mind is that famous statement by Arthur Jafa, which he calls his mantra, and he says, "I want to make black cinema with the power, beauty, and alienation of black music." And he adds, the larger preoccupation is how do we force cinema, or art, or whatever, to respond to the existential, political, and spiritual dimensions of who we are as a people. So I was just wondering how this resonates with you and what you'd like to say about it.
Again, I could say like there's a lot to speak about and unpack here for sure. But starting with, Arthur Jafa's statement, I would definitely, I come from a music background actually, so sound and music. And so that's sort of my first form, or the form that I started with. And in many ways, the reason why I think I didn't pursue it solely as a form was actually because I didn't feel it was enough as a form. Like I didn't want to be constrained by that form. So when I met Ruanne and we started, she also had similar ideas and she came from a more visual background. And so we also felt the sort of constraint with the form. And I think that music and liveness was definitely something we tried to keep, but one of the first things that, me and Ruanne were working with archive before we could film anything, right? Because we didn't know what we would film in Palestine. This was 10 years ago, and we problematized this sort of image that was coming from Palestine, and it's sort of the saturation of the images from Palestine had sort of lost the potency. They'd lost their potency because of their repetition, and so we really started to think about sound and the oral space and how, power is enacted through sound, but also how sound and music and certain forms of subcultures in music are able to subvert this power also through sound and music. So, you know, in Palestine, your horizon visually is like literally severed, right? You have walls, so sound becomes a real possibility, right? Sound becomes something that can permeate the walls, something that can, you know, travel, and you can engage with on a visual sort of, you know, yeah, exactly. And then so I think our investigation in sound allowed us to almost like make the sort of what had been normalized to kind of make strange again what had become normalized, not just like formally but also politically, like in the way we were approaching things and thinking about them. And I feel that really sort of informed our image making and our filming, and this would happen all before we picked up a camera and started to film. And I think that, you know, also in general, I would say that we come from a more of a oral culture and rather than a visual culture, and the resonance that happens. I mean, we're always trying to find different forms and ways that we can engage and speak to people, right? Not just beyond the sort of exhibition space and beyond the art world and beyond the academia or beyond whatever discipline that we might find ourselves in. So music in that sense made total sense for this project and made total sense for our practice. Yeah, what else?
The first part, I think you had like 3 questions in one question. But
I don't have a lot of time.
I'll go back to I think the first part about, I think that, you know, for us, being in Palestine, I feel that the struggle for Black liberation was always something, you know, that was very much part of our consciousness, and I have always felt like a really deep, not just it's beyond solidarity, but a deep resonance with, you know, and so I definitely think that moving here just really deepened that encounter and that conversation in terms of also the amount of, you know, Black thinkers that really speak to the conditions that we're trying to think through. And this particular article that's here is about South Africa, and it's also about song. And there's a particular song that's referenced that is also about how the land haunts South Africans in the sense of landlessness, the sense that your land is not your land, and you don't even have a place to bury the dead. And that is something that, I feel very deeply, in the sense that it is yours and not yours the whole time. And at the same time, when I was reading that article, there was a great graveyard in Jerusalem that was being partially destroyed. So this sense that even the graves are not safe. So I think those, you know, those connections are definitely very much there, and there's a way in which, if we're thinking about the antiphonal aspect of the project, that's also very much in these other threads, right? Thinking about this cry of worldlessness, or that's connected to landlessness, that's connected to the issue of land, which is it's material, but it's more than that. It's also a question of being, actually. So I don't know how much more to say about that, or to.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that basically I think that, you know, we're constantly engaging with especially after coming here, you know. I mean, like Ruanne just said, these are things that don't just come up for us for the project, but they come up for us on an everyday, just being, right, just engaging. Like, these are things and words that resonate profoundly with us. Like, they're not just, they even speak for us. They allow us, they give us language. So it's very organic and very, yeah, just a natural way of, like, I think, relating to it.
Can I put the sound?
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to have a chance to relay with that question of your working in relation to key aspects of what one could call Black thought, but one could also think about as thought so deeply engaged with the global anti-Blackness, and that question of what would constitute something like an anti-Blackness, that would be just something more than the solidarity work that you were talking about, Ruanne, and substituted, I think, the word resonance. That seems really key to the particular praxis that you're offering us here, which is a way to move past that ostensibly single issue, single topic segregation, to create the possibilities for transversal connection. So the force of a kind of conduit or connection that may not be because of what would seem to be a shared experience or shared condition, the possibility of creating these energetic connections and really profound ones, but not because they're given to you already. And that transversal, one of the possibilities would be to create that out of maybe not the same kind of wound or same experience of the rent fabric of the world, but some way that transversal vulnerability could be activated. And it seems as though there's something about this spectral collectivity that can happen through a particular kind of lamentation that isn't just voice, but seems to be a shaking, a shiver, a kind of tremor, the sense of waves, including sound waves that may travel, but unexpected pathways and into and through bodies, that seems like so much of what this antiphony is doing in the work, just to go back to the core that I wanted to dive into immediately. So it's not just grief, but what's happening with this particular kind of sounding and the possibilities of a kind of transversal connectivity that's being pulsed here.
Yeah, I think there's, it's as you were saying, it's not just voice. It's also the resonance in the body, right, or the reverberation in the body. So it's the pulse, and very often the performers are using their bodies to create. So that was also an aspect of the work. I mean, the musicians that we worked with are all electronic musicians that are very used to actually working with all kinds of hardware and software, and have never been in a position where they just used their voice and their bodies. And that was something that I think also, they put a lot of trust in us to go through the process together of just having themselves there, very bare, and then, creating sound through not just their voice but their movements, and that was really significant for us in terms of just also stripping down the actual archive that we were working with, and trying to get to, what is this material actually doing and saying, and how can we take it somewhere else, essentially. So something, that we were constantly thinking about was how we can, work in almost broken parts, and through these broken parts create something that didn't have to be coherent, so something that still remains sort of incomplete or not fully written. So, I think that's what would come to mind in relation to that. Is there?
Yeah, I would just add that embodiment has been a large aspect to our practice in general. The sort of we always try to break this space between the viewer and the art object, and you're always sort of in our work, and even if you don't like it, you're in it. You have to just leave. Then it's not. So I think that that embodiment, I think, is I would say also a political position. It's not just it's not just about the lived experience, but it's also a formal choice to make, and it has a lot to do with embodiment of living under colonialism, the embodiment of living under a total capitalist system that you are giving yourself, for us to survive, we have to give our bodies up and separate our minds from our bodies. And as a Palestinian, that's crossing a checkpoint, right? It's an everyday occurrence, right? So that embodiment becomes a very important element, I think, in the work. And I guess it shows with
It's felt, I think,
Yeah,
maybe
felt,
even more
yeah.
than shown.
Yeah.
Constantly asking us to feel something that's invisible or infra.
I have maybe one last question because I think we're running out of time.
Probably, yeah.
I just wanted to, because I mean, this project is entirely new, at least in its final version. So I basically discovered it yesterday, but it's a huge kind of, it's an ocean of things. I mean, I ended up spending the entire day yesterday with it and let go everything else I was doing. No regrets. What we haven't seen now, I mean, I mentioned earlier that there's some information about some of the found material, but there's also an index with the entire, I mean, probably not the entire, but like almost 200 videos there available with, you know, titles and topics and oftentimes transcriptions and translations into English. There are keywords. And it's kind of an incredible amount of material, especially for me. For instance, I mean, I speak and understand Arabic, but an Iraqi mourning song is really difficult for me to understand. So it's very nice to have that transcription. And that must have been an incredible amount of work for you and the people you've worked with. But I couldn't help but wonder, I mean, a lot of your work in the past has had a strong element of willed opacity to it, right? And in discovering this index, and of course, most of it comes from things that are or were in YouTube, some of them no longer accessible, but still had been made public. But I was just wondering if you, and also because a lot of it is these very intimate moments, wedding ceremonies, funerals, little songs among friends. There's a fragility to the material. There's a delicateness to the material. So I was wondering if you saw a risk there of exposing this material to, I don't know, extractive kinds of gazes, basically. And how do you think about that? How do you see? I find that it's very precious to have it and to have it organized and preserved. But there's a kind of a fine line between that preservation and exposure, and I was wondering how you think about that tension within this work.
I mean, the first thing, I mean, so that's definitely one of the things that is, the questions that's always there, right? Like the sort of, I would say the exoticization of this material, essentially, right? And the gaze onto this material, and that's something that has come up with like the installation that we're working with, we're editing, but also the material as we were collecting it, right? And I think that, you know, this has been going on for a very long time, and so the selection process itself tries to sort of almost like evade these things, right? Because this is like 176 videos, but there are thousands of videos, and many of them were too good or too nice, right? Or too, like, there's something that is like not coming out, for example. Like, we're trying to find attention in the videos, and it's not just like, oh, this is like an amazing video of this person singing and they sound amazing and it just takes your heart, and like there's a lot of that, but we decided not to really engage with it on that way ourselves. So speaking on me personally, I had to almost unlearn to like not fetishize some of the material, to sort of go down to its deeper or more sort of what I'm trying to say with it beyond the sort of just aesthetic or oral sort of allure that the material has. But still, there's obviously a limit to that, right? There's always going to be some form of, and this material is already in the public space. Many of this material has had millions of views on YouTube, and a lot of it still is there. You know, we've also added an external link, like a button. So you press that, you go straight to the person's page and the video itself. Yeah, I think that, you know, that's.
I think that was an important aspect for us, that it's all material that is essentially already existing online, and not things that we, you know, recorded and then. And I think there's a couple of things. I think a big part of the project is to what extent there's a virtual call and response that has happened with this with a lot of these videos where people are responding and calling to each other, and as you go through things, you'll see that songs are repeated. And I think that's a really significant aspect in the way in which, of course, the internet is a huge site of surveillance and it's very amnesiac, but it was important for us to look at how people are using it to also subvert that. And, you know, I think for us there's like a distinction between the work that we were experiencing before and that, you know, has very few archive videos, and then the index, which is more, it's more of a call for especially people from these places to think about this material. We're also going to be commissioning writers to engage with it. So it's really very much about creating, you know, a kind of, you know, a discursive sort of field in relation to this index. But I think that's definitely a question, and, you know, with the installation that we're creating, there's very few moments of the archive, and they're all very abstracted, and it's precisely for that question of that capture that can happen and that gaze that essentially can potentially fetishize. And so in a way, that's why we also wanted the index to really just be an index that doesn't really have much intervention, but is actually also creating a space, we hope, for scholarship actually around it, you know. You know, so that's...
And for it to be used as material to sample, to, you know, like other musicians could be, you know, that's why we have like a, as well, the threads are very much following instruments and things like that. So there's a focus on the music and then there's certain dance moves. And so, and obviously it's not like a complete, there's no such thing as a complete, you know, but it's more like a call actually to like...
Yeah, and also we felt that we'd been collecting this material, and we don't want it to somehow just, you know, I mean, it's not ours anyway. It belongs to the people who made it. It's already online, but it's also, I think there's a way in which in Palestine people collect archives and then privatize them and keep them for themselves. And so a lot of our practice has been about putting it back into the world. I think something happens when you bring these videos together. You start to see something else. So yeah, it was always a back and forth. It's been a very long conversation about these things. So, but yeah.
There's just so many thoughts, but I keep going around this idea of Black feminist thought and Angela Davis' Freedom is a Constant Struggle, which directly addresses like the Palestine situation in terms of solidarity. And the idea of resonance really kind of hit me beyond solidarity, resonance, something that is like more embodied and is felt. So I wondered, because also with, I mean, one of the things that really surprises me about the war in the Ukraine is how white people have responded to, in terms of solidarity, and how Europe has responded when like there is not this compassion or empathy or solidarity with Palestine at that same level. So that desensitization of the images that you're presenting in relationship to the grandmother giving seeds to the soldier, for example, that's the most viral thing. But how this archive can work in this kind of bridge, or this kind of vibration that creates resonance and solidarity. Yeah, I wonder if you have more to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, the project really started with us needing to make a connection to Iraq and Syria and places that we're not able to go from Palestine. So I think it really begins there with us. In the sense that, you know, even those threads and lines are severed for us, right? Because there's such a kind of artificial singularity that's been produced that, in relation to Palestine, but there's also a physical isolation. So definitely the whole project for us was, to begin with, about really creating that sense of echo, and thinking about how actually we can, actually generate something very different out of that material and take it to other places, really. So, yeah, I would say that I always go back there, and then I think from there, definitely it is about the intersections, where, these points of intersection, and how forms of ritual and song and dance are really critical forms of resistance to colonial and capitalist capture, essentially. So I think definitely the whole project starts with this need to find that echo, find that string from. It's like basically reading the world from Palestine and then seeing how it can be read the other way too. So I don't know if you want to add something.
Thank you very much for this. I found the last slide very, very interesting. So you created your own archive out of the archival material. So here's another archive coming out of the archive. And now the way I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh wow, there is a whole archive sitting there, right? Just waiting for someone to come and activate it, do something with it. It's just, there is this latency. There is a potential, right? Maybe it's unfair to ask you this question, but where do you see the possibility of someone coming up and opening up this archive, activating it? What's the possibility that maybe you hope to see out of this archive?
Yeah, I think that's precisely why we created that. I mean, to be honest, we try not to use the word archive, only because it's so loaded with so many things, and it's meant to mean all these things, and we're basically trying to break all that. And I don't know, I mean, the other word I'm thinking of is collection, but that's also terrible. So yeah, archive is fine, but that's we're trying to problematize the whole notion. But absolutely, we put it there for people to do something with. We did something with it already, and we are trying to sort of unpack all the different elements and processes that we went through to create something out of this. But there's absolutely in it, that's why it's there for others to create things. And actually, part 3 of the project is what others could create. Well, hopefully. So there's a call, and hopefully part 3 of the project would culminate what other scholars, artists, musicians could do with this material. So it's a call, and I'm glad you saw it. You read the call.
Okay, there's this very famous professor that talks that we breathe coloniality, especially when it comes to art. And you talked about the decision not to call it archives, and the way I'm thinking about it, you're trying to decolonize the project as well. I would like to hear more about other decisions you made, so that you make sure that this project doesn't fall into to be serving colonial and perpetuate colonial ways of art production and art consumption.
I think that's intrinsic to every part of our practice. I mean, I can take it back again to even the spaces that we were filming in, which are all places that are under threat of being taken over by settlers, which, essentially a disappearing landscape that we know that, in a year we could come back and not be allowed to be there. We had various encounters with soldiers and settlers. And so I think that it really for us begins there. And it's not about filming so much as it's about the process, and it's about us being in those spaces with the performers, and very much claiming the space. So I think that's, you know, really at the core of the project. The filming of the performances is like the after effect, really, for us. And it's the same with the project that Jill mentioned more than once, Honey at My Mask. You know, we were going to the sites of destroyed villages inside what is now Israel, and it was about the trips. It wasn't about the filming. It was about taking the trips with young Palestinians that had never been to these places before, and about having those conversations together and being involved in those returns together and really thinking through what can return mean. And then I think, you know, at every point as you're making the work, you have to obviously constantly assess how you can not be captured by even institutions that you're working with, you know. So how do you make it more and more difficult for them to try to sort of domesticate you in a way? And that is a question that comes up at every point for us, and I think we have, you know, various different strategies at different points. But I do feel, you know, one of the ways was also for us to actually create an online project that could be anywhere and really tries to break out of essentially the walls of the exhibition space or the institution, and tries to really not be contained in that way. And there will be, you know, we're working also with various other tentacles for the project to think about how it can really be adisciplinary and avoid it being sort of contained or categorized. So one of the strategies is this online project. But there's many other strategies that we're constantly working with and thinking about. So it's something that and you know, and it's a constant struggle. It's not like, oh, that's it, you're fine. You're constantly trying to resist that capture, essentially. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. My question is about the performers. How did you guys pair each performer with an archive piece, and like, were there any failed attempts where somebody was like, yeah, that's it?
Actually, there were more performers, so there was maybe 2 or 3 more people that we did the session, and then they were like, nah, which is fine, because there was a level of trust, like these are, and vulnerability, absolutely, because, you know, we know these people, like, you know, we're friends, so we know when they're just faking it. So if they're gonna come and they're like, oh, I'm gonna perform this, okay, give me my money, I'm out. No, like, you know, so it was a process, and they had to trust us, and they had to arrive to a level of vulnerability. And then what was the other question?
How do we pair them?
Oh yeah, basically we know them as musicians, like we know their work, we know their practice. So obviously there was a bit of that happening. We tried not to do that. But they also browsed the archive and like were, you know, responding to certain elements, responding to certain things. We tried to make selections for them so that it doesn't go on and on. But it was more like them actually, like, and how they responded to certain material. Then we would sort of take a note and talk about it and things like that. So yeah, it was very much collaborative. Yeah.
Okay, and that is the perfect segue into our performance. So,
oh yeah, Julmud is performing, and he's one of the performers.
Yes.
And his album drops end of the month. Buy it from Bandcamp.
Yeah.
ما هو أبو زبيب جاي يلف الخور السايلة ما هو زبيب
شايف في كل الميدان زباين حاطط ساعة وراح يصير مشاكل لما تدور في طوايل كسرتهم بدون حدا يتخش للموت جيب سجاير اللي في البوم جيب سجاير اللي في البوم ماشي في كل الميدان زباين حاطط ساعة وراح يصير مشاكل لما تدور في طوايل كسرتهم بدون حدا يتخش للموت جيب سجاير اللي في البوم جيب سجاير اللي في البوم
حط احتاطي اسود مطاطي شغل بتاع مش عالفاضي حكومة بوس وغاندي عيوني عالشباك عيونك عالشبابي نشرب شاي مع الغالي ونقوم بنخالي ساعة رنسام شغال جيب كل شي من البال باين كل شي على غالي دنيا قطار لما السكة حارة زي حمار شرب ودخانة مخي طار أصبحات والعالبحر مصاري هلا آخر الشهر
ماشي شايف في كل الميدان زباين حاطط ساعة وراح يصير مشاكل لما تدور في طوايل كسرتهم بدون حدا يتخش للموت جيب سجاير اللي في البوم جيب سجاير اللي في البوم ماشي شايف في كل الميدان زباين حاطط ساعة وراح يصير مشاكل لما تدور في طوايل كسرتهم بدون حدا يتخش للموت جيب سجاير اللي في البوم جيب سجاير اللي في البوم
طارد ضلنا نركض ونطارد حقلة وشارت في القارب تحت المي بنطلع له وين يا ساكت ونطارد لا لقمة العيش والخاطر لا طول العمر والباطن دق 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 قلماني هي بنطارد ونطارد ونضلنا نركض ونطارد والحقلة وشارت في القارب تحت المي بنطلع له وين يا ساكت ونطارد لا لقمة العيش والخاطر لا طول العمر والباطن دق 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 قلماني هي بنطارد
ماشي شايف في كل الميدان زباين حاطط ساعة وراح يصير مشاكل لما تدور في طوايل كسرتهم بدون حدا يتخش للموت جيب سجاير اللي في البوم جيب سجاير اللي في البوم ماشي شايف في كل الميدان زباين حاطط ساعة وراح يصير مشاكل لما تدور في طوايل كسرتهم بدون حدا يتخش للموت جيب سجاير اللي في البوم جيب سجاير اللي في البوم
صاحبي صون يا خالي صاحبي صون هاي ربعي هون يا الغالي ربعي هون والشدة هون يا صاحبي الشدة هون كحل العيون السما كحل عيون زين الكون يا صاحبي كل الكون لا ربي لا ضلي أدعي طول اليوم والكحل يا ما شو دوبت بدون والله لا أقطع البحر لا جيلون
هذا على الحصيرة وانا بس بيدي بطبل بيدي بطبل
كم سمع اللخ مش مندي السوق زي الجد مش وهمي بشتغل بعد الفطور على البدري ماليش اصدور انا اضبرني زهري واحد على واحد زي بلنتي عربي بحسب بتحبيني اذا ابتسمتي صلاة تتلفش فتشهد ضرب البسكي صوت من فوق زي سخان شمسة
دبر 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 جابلك راس مفضل هز الراس لسطر مهوي زي الصندل بالبقل اللون الاصفر مؤمن في الجيل الاصغر مؤلم كيف هو يطبل حتى الانترنت تتعطل دبر 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 جابلك راس مفضل هز الراس لسطر مهوي زي الصندل بالبقل اللون الاصفر مؤمن في الجيل الاصغر مؤلم كيف هو يطبل حتى الانترنت تتعطل
هادي على الحصيرة وانا بس بإيدي بطبل بإيدي بطبل هادي على الحصيرة وانا بس بإيدي بطبل بإيدي بطبل
وبالاحرف بنطبل صح صح رب تقلب على بركة ربك وانا دغدغ في الحظ كشرية محلاك يا خراشي يا بطة دقدق على قلبي قد ما تلقى رقم ولا لون ولا حدا ولا شو ما بيخطر في بالك انا قلق واصلي بني بلد انا حطة انا شفت اللي فوق انا شفت اللي تحت انا شو اللي في اللي فوق مين هذا بلا زور ابو غالي ابو بود على زبي بلا كوندو وبالاحرف بنطبل لابتوب بنخطط في الضف الغربي لنهر الاردن بنشد لما نرقص ونحضن ولا
صون يا خالي زهري صون هاي ربيهون يا خالي ربيهون الشدتون يا صاحبي شدتون كحل العيون السما كحل عيون زين الكون يا صاحبي الكون لا ربي لا ضلي يدعي طول اليوم والكحل يا ما شو دوبت بدون والله لا ضل لا جيلون
خدعتيني بتعميم معلش معيش مصاريف خليني مسري على كل السنين ألم الفحم من جيني أنط أنا عن الشيك واجي عيل أنا كده شيك مسألش عن شي أنا أكيد أنا طيب أنا طيب خدعتيني بتعميم معلش معيش مصاريف خليني مسري على كل السنين ألم الفحم من جيني أنط أنا عن الشيك واجي عيل أنا كده شيك مسألش عن شي أنا أكيد أنا طيب أنا طيب بمشي شوي شوي في نفس الأوضة الأوضة مغيمة راسي ليش خد هيولع مساحة الليلة خلي الطاقة طايلة صباب الورد جايلة خالق 100 صنف دوبك كمل كل الليلة خافش العطف حنينة شوف اللمعة مبينة كل القعدة مغيبة كل القعدة مغيبة كل الأوضة مغيبة كل الأوضة مغيبة كل الأوضة مغيبة كل الأوضة مغيبة بمشي شوي شوي في نفس الأوضة الأوضة مغيبة راسي ليش خد هيولع مساحة الليلة خلي الطاقة طيبة صبابة الورد جاية خالق 100 سنة كمل كل الليل خافش العطف حنين شوف اللمعة مبينة كل القعدة مغيبة القعدة مغيبة الأوضة مغيبة كل الأوضة مغيبة الأوضة مغيبة خدعتيني بتعميم معلش معيش مصاريف خليني مسري على كل السنين من جيني أنط أنا عن الشيك واجي عيل أنا كده شيك مسألش عن شي أنا أكيد أنا طيب أنا طيب خدعتيني بتعميم معلش معيش مصاريف خليني مسري على كل السنين ألم الفحم من جيني أنط أنا عن الشيك واجي عيل أنا كده شيك مسألش عن شي أنا أكيد أنا طيب أنا
كل الأوضة مغايمة كل الأوضة مغايمة كلها هون مبيتة كلها هون مخيمة وانا عنا الليلة كلها هون نايمة كلها هون نايمة كلها هون مخيمة كلها هون نايمة كلها هون نايمة كلها هون مخيمة كل الأوضة مغايمة كل الأوضة مغايمة
بريدي كلها هون خاينة هون عنا الليلة كلها هون عيني كلها هون عيني كلها هون خاينة كلها هون عيني كلها هون عيني كلها هون خاينة
واحد وعي واحد حب واحد بجيك بالفرشة تاعتك عارف منيح سماتك على الخارطة قسموا بلادك خليك متذكر شقاوتك حبس انفاسك في الشارع بساعدك الحشد الشعبي ماسك سلاحي بارض القرنفل بستنشق فل كل صبح الشمس مشرقة من الطبيعة اللي حوالي بعبي الثقة حاسس فيك حتى لو فيش بين الصلة الوعي واحد بدهم ايانا عجلنا بنتاخد بالفخد سكين بتشوف البخت يا مسكين زي اسماعيل ياسين متمدد على الفرش في مستشفى مجانين الهنود الحمر سكان الاصليين اسأل مين زميل مستعمرين مستظرفين حبس مين ومين زي رقم ثابت للأسرة بضلوا عادل بس بحفر نفط بجازف عوطان العصاب عازف بمسك وجع بالاخر الجشع متاكل الفلك شايف نيزك عيتك مع السمك عيمك عارف كيف فيقك بالوهم صح برد الصعصعين عارف كيف اثنين جايين عليك في الليل كنتم زي الويل انت رقص مالي بزبط طول بالي اسمع حجار عراسك لسالي قال مجوهرات الدم عليهم اصفر لون عليهم الوعي واحد كاسر بابك بتفجر البابل انتحاريين لابسين قنابل ساعب ارواح يشبع المالك سميني وكلت انباء انا ده راسك اصدر فيه للباب بتعرف وين المفتاح عند الحياه كل اليوم جراي روح لف بلاي طول جوا عقلك شربين معي الشاي برناي عشانك حان حد جاي على المعده افتح الصندوق العدة استنى ما تتكلم عشان في الشارع بتلثم اطلاق نيران من حولي اهلا وسهلا هلا اهلا وسهلا